Well, I am absolutely delighted to say that joining us on the Godcast this week is legendary TV anchorman Gordon Burns. Gordon, good morning.
Good morning to you, Alex.
How are you? Are you in Belfast this morning?
No, I haven't lived in Belfast for 38 years.
Where are you? Say again?
I live in Manchester.
You live in Manchester. Very good.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm really pleased that you were happy to join us this morning. I'm gonna crack on, and I just want to talk about life growing up in Belfast and what that was like. What are your recollections of that? Was it a fun time, or was it a happy place, or not?
Well, it was. I mean, I have to explain a bit because I didn't grow up that much in Belfast. Hence the lack of my Northern Ireland accent. Right? Because when I was 5. I was born in Belfast, and we lived in a town now, a city called Lisburn, about 8 miles south of Belfast. But when I was 5, my dad's job took him to England. He went to work he was a journalist, and he went to work on Hansard, which is the record of parliamentary debates. Everything that's said in the House of Commons is recorded by shorthand writers, typed up, and appears in this daily book Hansard, and my father went to work on that in Westminster. So from the age of 5 till I was 13, excuse me, a bit hoarse. From 5 to 13, I lived in England, in Kent, and then we moved back to Belfast when he became editor of Hansard in the Northern Ireland Parliament. And so my latter years, from 13 on, were at school there, and then into the Belfast Telegraph newspaper as a journalist, before eventually going over to London to further my career, and then back to Belfast to continue it in television. So I've been a bit backwards and forwards all my life.
Okay.
Growing up, what I do remember in Belfast from 13 onwards, etc., that was okay. It was fine. Belfast was a bit of a dead city in those days, but I had a happy time, happy family, good mates, good school, and so everything growing up at that time was fine. It was only later.
Yeah.
In fact, I turned to work at UTV that the troubles happened, and that became a very different kettle of fish.
Was it a religious family growing up, or not at all? Or
it was a very religious family growing up. My dad was a pillar of the Presbyterian Church. He was an elder of the church, and he edited and wrote the church magazine free of charge and all that sort of thing. And I, sorry to say this in front of you, but I was dragged to church ever since I could remember. Sat in the same pew every Sunday, listened to many an extraordinarily boring sermon, and couldn't wait to get home for my Sunday lunch. Forgive me again, but I felt more or less brainwashed into it. I joined a group called the Crusaders, which was a very considerable Bible-thumping group, which had summer camps where we were all under bell tents and playing strange games like wide games in the woods and paddocks and other games like that, until all that changed, particularly when I covered the Troubles and thereafter. And I have to tell you, I am a confirmed atheist now.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay. Was that? Would you put that down to church experiences as a boy, or was that just kind of something you just came to naturally?
Well, I'm down to a lot of things. I mean, I would certainly put it down to that sort of almost forced into religion upbringing. I would put it down to seeing how religious people and how churches operated during the Troubles. The Catholic Church and the Protestant Church, both to me, were a disgrace, really, and were a bit scared of getting too heavily involved in the Troubles when that's the time they should have been involved in preaching what they believed. So that annoyed me, but that can't stop you actually believing in something. I was just annoyed at them. But at the end of the day, the more I looked around the world, the more I thought about it, the more all this stuff about prayer that I was told could change anything. And I could see the prayers all around the world for starving and dying kids who just needed a cloud to bring water so their crops could grow around the world, and all sorts of things said to me there was no sign of any God, and if there was, he wasn't a particularly good one. So in the end, as a journalist, I rely on facts. I want some evidence. I find the stories from the birth of Jesus onwards far too hard to accept and believe. And as I see no sign of a God, I have to be honest with myself. I could say, well, I'm agnostic, I don't know. But in fact, I don't believe there is anything. When you're dead, all gone. And that's me, so I'm a confirmed atheist.
Okay, I just think it's wonderful that you're honest and straightforward. You'll not be
surprised. I'm happy to debate with you for half an hour on another occasion, if you like. I'll happily debate.
Yeah, well, it would be fascinating, and I would love to do that possibly. But I think what you say is very interesting about factual and evidential. I'm a person who didn't go to church at all as a boy, and came to faith in my 40s, and I'm in my 50s now. But I was fortunate enough to go to the Holy Land this year, where I saw some wonderful historical archaeological sites, which were quite evidential. And whilst I'm not going to sit here and spend 25 minutes trying to convince you, I would certainly encourage you to take a look at some of that stuff, because it's absolutely fascinating and left me very convinced about the archaeological evidence to back up some of the stories. And whilst I of course agree that some of the stories are very difficult to get their head around, I think they need work, they need a lot of time. But it's not about, I don't want to get into a Christian atheist debate. I really admire your honesty and respect that greatly. Just going on to your career as a journalist, could you just talk a bit more about reporting on those troubles? I mean, I was fortunate enough to visit Belfast last year. I recently interviewed Eamon Holmes and spoke to him about what I thought it was a fabulous city, absolutely thriving, but with a bubbling tension still there, and obviously emanates from the troubles. But if we just go back to the troubles, what are your kind of recollections of reporting on that?
Well, you're right about Belfast today. It's a fantastic city. I go back a lot, and it's thriving. It's lively. It's thrown up all sorts of brilliant restaurants, pubs, clubs, you name it. It's just nothing like what it used to be in my young day. I could say the same for Manchester. When I came here, it was a terrible dead city at night, and now it's the most amazing place. But in terms of the troubles, I went back. I had been working after I left school. I went on and on at the editor of the Belfast Telegraph. I had done for several years to take me on as a journalist. And when I finished my A-levels, he took me on the Belfast Telegraph. And I worked as a journalist, learning the trade in Northern Ireland, for about 4 years, until I landed by a great fluke and an amazing story, but maybe for another time. But I landed a job I was totally underqualified for, working my love of sport, and I worked for BBC Radio for the Sports Report programme, which still runs to this day at 5 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. I got to work on that, and then I came back to Belfast in 1967 when they appointed me sports editor of Ulster Television. I was the youngest sports editor ever. Wow. In TV history, I think. So I was editor there, and in 1969, which is the year the trouble started, but before they started, the presenter of the evening news programme, the equivalent of Granada Reports or Northwest Tonight here in the Northwest, over there, the ITV station that I worked for was Ulster Television, or UTV as it's generally known as. And the presenter of their regular evening news programme, UTV Reports, fell out of his contract, and they had nobody to do the show that night. So I was roped in because I did the sports show, and I had a journalistic background. So I was asked if I'd fill for the rest of the week while they found somebody else, which became a second week, which became a third week, until they said, actually, this is going quite well. Do you fancy doing it full time? So I took on the job of that, on the stipulation that I didn't have to do politics, because I said I wasn't really into it, and politics wouldn't have been my thing. And they said, oh, there's nothing like that much over here, the odd councillor, you can cope with that. And then within about 2 months of taking the job, the first stones were thrown at the Civil Rights March at Burntollet Bridge, led by the Reverend Ian Paisley. And so that was it. I was suddenly in at the deep end. But the good thing about it was that every night I learnt more and more about the troubles, what was happening, how they were developing, what was really going on behind the scenes. Because all the politicians, or vast majority of them would come up to the green room after the programme, and they all enjoyed a drink, with a few exceptions. Reverend Ian was a teetotaler and didn't come up to the green room. But nonetheless, the others did, and you learned an awful lot about it, and you got quite close to them. And in that way, you become almost an expert in the troubles of what's going on. I got hooked into it and fascinated by it. But there were some really tough times. Those first 4 years of the troubles, when I did that program, were probably the most violent of all the years of the troubles. There were bombs going off all over the city. There were people being shot, pubs being blown up, soldiers, policemen being shot, etc., etc. And then eventually the Protestant paramilitaries decided to fight back, and they set up to fight back against the IRA, and they were carrying out horrific tit-for-tat murders and so on. And we were constantly under threat at UTV. At the end of every program, you got a massive protests and even death threats because you'd interviewed a particular politician, quite tough. And then the next day you'd interview a politician from the other side and give him as tough a time as you could, and you get the threats from the other side. So as long as they were fairly even, after every program, you felt you're all right. But there was an occasion where one of them was a particularly serious death threat.
Fascinating stuff. Just you've interviewed prime ministers, you've interviewed leading politicians throughout the world. Is there maybe somebody that really left their mark on you that you were kind of in awe of, or maybe before or after the interview, where you just found them utterly compelling? Or
well, thanks to my job, I've been very privileged, I feel anyway, to have interviewed 8 successive British prime ministers, starting with Edward Heath in Downing Street when I worked for UTV. Did a big interview with him there that made every national newspaper the next day and maybe slightly changed the course of Irish history. It was quite a bombshell interview. But I've interviewed them all since him, which included Margaret Thatcher. Interviewed her 3 times, in fact. And these are all at-length interviews, not a couple of minutes, all the way down through Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, the whole lot of, right up to David Cameron, when shortly after interviewing him, I retired. And they've all been interesting. 3 of the prime ministers lost their tempers with me and shouted at me, which is quite something. Others were decent. And people often say, well, as you just have, who's made their mark, who impressed you the most? And I can give you 2 opposites. Who impressed me the least? Who was the most difficult and not very pleasant? Absolutely Edward Heath. He was quite rude, really. And the other strange one that everybody thought was a nice man, and maybe he is most days, but he wasn't with me, was John Major. Okay. But the best, strangely, is the one most people think must have been a fairly horrible person. That's Gordon Brown. And the reason I like Gordon Brown is it's quite interesting if you've got a minute for the story, because I went to interview him when the Labour Party was holding their party conference in Manchester. Our programme, North West Tonight, were doing a piece on child poverty. And we put in an application that when he came to Manchester for the party conference, would he spare us 15 minutes to talk about child poverty? And we got the answer, yes, he would. So I went to do the interview with him in one of the conference hotel in Manchester. When I got there, I found I was at the end of a long line of all the national journalists who'd been granted interviews for that one day. He was doing them all. So we had BBC, ITV, CNN, Channel 4, Channel 5, you name it, American, French, the lot were all in front of me. And when it came to the last interview to do, his very bossy PA lady said to me, right, everybody's overrun their time. Sorry, we can't do your interview, Gordon. I said, what? She said, you can't do your interview. He hasn't got time. He's got to go to Brussels later on. So I'm sorry, we can't do it. I said, well, hang on. I've got it in writing that he'll do this interview. We have promoted it on television that he's going to do it. It's child poverty. It's important. We insist that he does it. She said, well, he can't. So I said, right, well, fair enough. I will then go on television tonight And I will tell everybody that we have a letter from the Prime Minister saying he'll do it, and he pulled out of it, but he let every other interviewer interview it, and we'll see how that goes down. And she said, well, okay, you can have a minute and a half. I said, I can't do child poverty in a minute and a half. And she said, well, that's all you'll get. So I thought, well, let's get the foot in the door. So I went in, I sat down, it was lovely. We chatted a bit, and then with the cameras already, we did the interview. And I went for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and I saw his PA going apoplectic behind the camera. And I thought, I'll keep going. I went to 6. She was making signs like that, wind up, wind up. And then she was going, stop, stop, stop behind the camera. And then when she decided to walk in, as she took one step, I just said, one last question, Prime Minister, and asked him another one. Now, it was slightly long, I'll try and truncate it a bit. But at the end of the interview, the Prime Minister, Sir Gordon Brown, said to me, listen, Gordon, I made a fluff in one of the answers, and I'd like to do it again if you don't mind. I said, I don't mind doing it again, as long as you give me the same answer. Just don't do the fluff. If you change it, it won't go out. And he said, no, no, that's exactly fine. She said, you can't do that, Prime Minister. Sorry, you can't do that. We haven't time for that. And he said, but I'd really like to put it right. I said, well, you can't. And she turned to me and said, you just have to leave the question and answer out. I said, I'm not leaving it out. It was a very, very important question and answer. So it's not going out. And in the end, after a bit of a fight between the three of them, or particularly between her and the Prime Minister, I said, listen, I know how to edit that, to take it out without changing the sense of what you said, Prime Minister. Is that okay with you? And in the end, he said, if you would do that, that would be fantastic. Right, did that. 1 year later, or maybe slightly less, I get a message from Downing Street to say the Prime Minister's coming to Manchester, he'd like to offer you an exclusive interview. Well, we don't jump at that. There has to be a reason for it, but we had another reason to interview him. So I said, okay, we'll do it. I went down to London the night before, missing, wait for this, I had to miss Manchester United, the Juventus, I think it was, right, in the Champions League, where I had tickets, etc., to get on the train the night before, because the only time he would do it is coming up in the first train in the morning. So I stayed in the hotel, got on the train, came up in the morning, sat down with him. We had a chat while they were setting the cameras up, and he said, oh, big match in Manchester last night, Gordon. Were you there? And I said, no, Prime Minister, I had to miss it to come down here to do you. I'm a big United fan. Do you know what he said? He said, oh, no. He said, oh, I'm so sorry I had to miss it just to interview me. I said, well, that's the only reason I'd miss a United match, to interview the Prime Minister. And he said, oh, that's very kind. He said, this is very silly. This has remained with me forever. This is very silly. He said, if you'd only let us know when you're coming down last night. I was at a function and came back to watch the TV highlights of the game. And you could have come round to Downing Street. Me. And I went, oh, that's kind. He said, no, seriously. If you're ever in this situation again, you're coming down to London, you have to miss the match. Just get in touch with the office here and you can come round and watch it at Downing Street. And I had this vision, which sadly disappeared when he lost the election. He walked out of Downing Street with his family in that famous shot he walked out.
Yeah.
I had the vision of me in London with the United match I was going to miss, getting a big party can of 4 pints of beer, 2 Indian takeaway curries, and going round to Downing Street to knock on the door and say, it's okay, Gordon said I could come and watch the match with him. But sadly, that is now never possible.
That's a lovely story. And maybe to just top that one, there's little danger of you missing United in the Champions League this season, Gordon.
And why would that be?
I don't think they're in it, are they?
We are in it.
Oh, right. Oh, sorry. Oh, you're in it now if you finish 4th.
The draw's already out. One of the teams we're playing is Paris Saint-Germain.
Oh, wow. Gordon, it's really great this, but I just want to move on because time is moving so quickly. I just want to, obviously you became synonymous with the Krypton Factor. And I was trying to explain to my young daughters what it was, and it's difficult to say what it was because is quiz show the fair description for it? How would you describe the Krypton Factor?
Well, it comes under the title of quiz shows. To better explain it to your daughter, you can still find episodes on YouTube. So if you'd like to look into YouTube, put Krypton Factor in, you'll get a couple of the old episodes. However, it was a slightly popular but upmarket quiz, in that it was mental agility, IQ, general knowledge, observational skills, physical ability. You had to run over a specially built by us Army assault course, and a hand-eye coordination test, which was done in the simulator of an aircraft, where you had to follow the instruments.
Yeah,
as pilots do. You don't have to look out the window, you follow the instruments, so they guide you down to the runway if you've got good hand-eye coordination. And Krypton, of course, is the planet that Superman came from. So we were looking for sort of Superman or woman, people who could cope with a whole range of challenges in order to win at the end. And it proved popular. In fact, with young children that couldn't possibly have understood mental agility and IQ tests, but they must have loved the way it looked and the assault course and the aircraft simulator. But very young children seemed to absolutely adore it.
Yeah, it was, and it was huge, wasn't it? It had humongous viewing figures, didn't it? I mean, obviously there wasn't the wide ranging channels, but wasn't it one of the highest viewing TV shows there was?
Well, it was. It ran for 18 years, from 1977 to 1995, which was fantastic. In peak time television, 7 o'clock Monday night. But at its peak, the audience was, I think our highest ever was 18.2 million, which is phenomenal in today's terms. But yeah, you're right. In those early days, we didn't have all the other channels. We had all the Sky channels. I don't think it was Channel 5. I doubt whether it was Channel 4. And also we had the added bonus of Coronation Street following us at 7:30, which has a mega audience. And it's top of the ratings, or it certainly was in those days, still right up there, but it was top of the ratings. And we were in number 2 slot. So yeah, but all through its life, it had very good ratings.
And where was that film, Gordon? Was that filmed in Granada Studios? Where was it filmed? Was that Granada Studios, or where did you film the Krypton Factor?
Yeah, it was done at Granada Studios, and the assault course we built was at an Army TA camp up at a place called Holcombe Brook, which is near Ramsbottom.
Yes.
That's where we did all the assault course runs.
Did you ever have a go at the assault course?
I had a go at everything on Krypton, test everything out. The assault course I was reluctant to do because I have a terrible head for heights. Shocking head for heights. If I stood on the chair I'm sitting on, I'd start to wobble. And some of the assault course is very high, particularly when you have to step out to nothing to come down the zip wire. But I was forced to do it because the newspapers wanted to see if the presenter could do what he asked his contestants to do, and they all came up to photograph me running it. So I've done it a couple of times. I have the probably the world record for the assault course in time. It's unfortunately probably the slowest ever, but I did do it from beginning to end. And I was always the volunteer when the camera crew needed to have a dry run at the aircraft simulator. I was always the volunteer who sat in, because I loved aircraft. And I was the one that tried to fly down onto the runway so the cameras could get their shots right. And I would say I crashed 80% of the time because being an oldie, I didn't grow up with computer games. I don't have the computer game ability that a 10-year-old has. And it applies to anyone who is flying in an aeroplane, that if the pilot and the co-pilot drop dead from food poisoning or whatever, and somebody has to land the aeroplane, if you call up a 10-year-old or 11-year-old who plays at constant computer games, they will land that plane.
They will, yeah.
Well, we had a TV Times, the Radio Times equivalent, did the competition, and the winner had to challenge me in the simulator. And this 10-year-old kid came along, and he learned a bit how to do it, and then he landed the plane on the runway perfectly. And then when I did it, I crashed about a mile short of the runway. So they're the ones to do it for you.
Lovely. That's a really nice story. I don't know whether people forget this, but you also were on Surprise, Surprise, weren't you, with Scylla?
Surprise, surprise. I was.
What was Scylla like, Gordon?
I mean, everything in my life Well, everything in my life has been a fluke. Every job I've got is a fluke, though you try and make it work for you. And I was supposed to do, surprise, surprise, as a one-off only. They were launching a new series. They had dropped Christopher Biggins from it, and they were going to do a quizzy type slot in it once a week with a different quiz show presenter. And they asked me to do the first of the new series. Then they dropped the idea the night before and put a thing called Searchline in, which was looking for people wanting to meet up with somebody I hadn't seen since they were at school or since they were in the RAF. 2 slots in the program with that, and they asked me as I was coming down anyway to do the quiz, and that wasn't happening. Would I do 1 slot of that, and they'd have a different presenter every week? So I said, oh, yeah, why not? I'm a freelancer, need the money. So it's not the program I ever have thought I'd choose to do, but I went down. It was enormous fun. Scylla was fabulous. And she said afterwards, I'd love for him, Gordon, to do the whole series, which turned out to be 5 series. And she was great to work with. She was good fun. Husband, now sadly gone too, Bobby.
Yeah.
He was good fun. Well, we always had a good time in the green room afterwards, and if we ever decided to all go out for dinner with the crew after the show, you had no problem getting a table in London, because the researcher would ring up a restaurant and say, can we have a table for 12? They'd say, no, we're full. She'd say, the researcher would say, it's for Cilla Black and her team. Who? Cilla Black. Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, actually, yes, fine, come down. Yeah. So it was an amazing experience. But she was great.
Yeah. And then, of course, you know, us in Lancashire, we just, you know, although you did those things, we associate you with Northwest Tonight. And I love regional TV. I love BBC and the Granada reports. And I think that played out well this week with the interview with Boris Johnson, that all those regional interviews came together to kind of make Boris look a bit of a clown, really, because he just showed his inadequacy in kind of answering questions. But I also think when I watched the show when Diane Oxberry passed away, that was and is one of the most. I watched it again this week because I knew we were going to be meeting. It still moved me to tears. It was and I got a real sense of what a lovely family and community you were. And just perhaps talk a little bit about that, Gordon. And does that continue? Do you stay in touch with, you know, people like Ranveer Singh and Tony, who's now on BBC 5 Live? Just say a bit about that, if you would.
I do stay closely in touch with Ranveer, who was my co-presenter in the final years. I did it for 10 years on my own, and then the last 5 years were with Ranveer. She was lovely and fabulous and a great talent and a good friend. And we laughed all day. We sat together in the office preparing scripts and stuff, and we just had the most fun time ever. But that, when I mean, Diane was part of the family. It was a family spirit. We were a great team. The whole team was terrific. We used to go out for curry nights and things like that, the whole team. And it's fantastic. So obviously I'd left Northwest Tonight when sadly Diane died, but it hit all of us badly, and I went into that program you saw, the tribute program to Diane, which went out 2 days after she died. And I cannot tell you how difficult for every single person that program was to make, let alone the viewers who loved Diane to watch. Because everybody who was putting that program together, because it was all Diane from beginning to end and flashbacks and so on, the editors, the video editors putting it together did it through tears through the day. The producer did it through tears. The director directing the show did it. We were all in tears. How Roger and Annabelle kept themselves together to get through that show as presenters, I don't know. Annabelle did break down a bit towards the end, but got herself together and insisted on carrying on and finishing. Because it just distressed us so much, because we loved her to bits. She was good, fun, good person, brilliant at her job, better than most people will ever realize how good she was at it. And nobody could remember a script and do interviews of weather all together without an autocue, which we all had. I mean, she was absolutely phenomenal. And the love that the nation, the region had and beyond, I've never seen a reaction like it. The tens of thousands of messages we got in. And when in the end, it was a private funeral, which just family and close friends, which I was honored to be asked to go to. Difficult again. But after that, they held a memorial service. Such was the love and affection coming in for her. And they held it in Manchester Cathedral. And you know, what other presenter, whether presenter, any presenter has had their funeral in the cathedral because of her fame. And they offered tickets on a ballot basis for all the people that wanted to come. Obviously, family and friends and all would be there, and our team mates at Northwest tonight. But they balloted the rest, and it's a huge thing, the cathedral, as you will know. We could have filled that in the applications we got 5 times over or more. That's the affection she was held in. And it was certainly the most difficult program and emotional one I have ever been in. And I've been in a few, believe me, in my time. But that was just awful.
Yeah.
And her death was quick. From the final diagnosis, terminal cancer, to when she died was 10 days. She got the final diagnosis on New Year's Eve. And died 10 days later. I mean, just shocking. And 2 young children that she absolutely adored. She couldn't wait to get home to them. I tell you this, in the days I did it on my own, and Diane and I used to sit, she used to join me at the end of the program for silly chat and finish, you know, like you do at the end of the program. And the audience was split. Half of them would ask my agent and other people to write to the Beeb saying, we think they're having an affair. You can see the way they're looking at each other and so on. And the other half didn't say, you can see she hates him. The way she treats him, etc., etc. And the actual truth of the matter was, I never saw Diane until she was live on the program, because her office was the other side of the BBC in Oxford Road. She didn't come in till later in the morning. She spent the afternoon doing all the radio bulletins and her evening one. I would rehearsal and then went live on the air, and 3/4 of the way through the program she came in the studio, took up her position, did the weather. At the end of the program she was out of the studio like a flash, because she couldn't wait to get home to the kids and so on and her animals, while I was still unplugging my earpiece and so on. She was in the car on the way home while I went up to the post-program meeting. But she was absolutely fantastic, lovely, gorgeous, and much.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you for sharing those reflections, Gordon. I really appreciate that. Just we're running out of time now, but regional TV, I was wondering what kind of relationship you had with your rivals at Granada. Was it a friendly rivalry? Did you get to know the guys there as well? What was the kind of spin on that?
Well, I have a soft spot for Granada because I was the first presenter of Granada Reports along with Bob Reeves. That's when I came back to England from Ulster Television after covering the Troubles. I came over to England to try my luck in a bigger pond, and I got, they were launching Granada Reports, 1973, with Bob Reeves, and they wanted another presenter. So I got hired, and I think Brian Truman was another presenter too. So 3 of us, they permed 2 from 3 each night. So I have a very soft spot for Granada, and I love Granada. I mean, it was a fantastic TV station. Demanded quality the whole time and everything they did in those days. And Krypton Factor, of course, was Granada for all those years. The very warm spot. But yeah, the rivalry was there. I mean, Lucy and I were friends. I think we could say that, in that any function we were at, we'd meet and chat and be very friendly and have a laugh and so on. But they, in the latter stages, they got a very brilliant new editor called Richard Frediani, who'd come from ITN in London. That's pretty amazing, ITN National News. And he'd come to transform it, because we were hammering them in the ratings. And he did transform it, and it turned it around until they started beating us in the ratings and in awards, etc. But he and I built up a friendship through extreme rivalry. We're both very competitive, to the point that even during, when my program was going on, Granada Reports had finished. It's 6 o'clock to 6:30. We're 6:30 to 7. So when we started to go out, I knew Richard Frediani was sitting in his seat at Granada watching our program, he made a note of everything we had to make sure he had it, or he had more than us, and so on. And so during the program, during Northwest Tonight, when it went into a package and I wasn't on screen, I would know he was watching, so I'd send him an email from my desk in the studio saying, "Bet you didn't get that story in your program." And instantly I get one back saying, "Actually, we ran that a week ago." So there's this banter and rivalry, and then when I retired and he went back to ITN in London to be editor of the 6:30 National News, we had dinner a lot and bantered and so on, and he's now back in the BBC. Well, no, it's the first time in the BBC for him. He's now editor of BBC Breakfast in the Morning, which is why it transformed in the last year into a much better programme than it was.
Yeah, wonderful, great to hear these stories.
He's impressed.
He's impressed. Right, okay. And now, just kind of to finish up, Gordon, you're retired, and before we went live, you were talking about your love of football, and you mentioned Jimmy Mack. So how do you spend your days as retired? Do you take it football's got a big part in that?
My days as a retired person at the minute are very dull and boring because due to the lockdowns, I can't have anyone around in my house or in my garden. I can't go into their house or their garden. My highlight of the day is probably walking down the road to the village at the end of my road and getting a Costa coffee. But generally speaking, I mean, I set up, when I retired, I set up a media consultancy where we helped big businesses and organizations and universities and so on with their media approach, how the media work, newspapers and television, etc. My colleague and friend Paul Horrocks is in the business with me. He used to be editor of the Manchester Evening News for many, many years. And we do a lot of media training for these big companies, teaching them how to cope with interviews, not how to avoid the question, as many media organizations do. We, on the contrary, tell people that you have to answer the question. If you're not going to answer it, don't go on television, because people see through it. Every time an MP or a minister avoids a question, you know what the answer is, because they won't say it. And so it's pointless. And so we say you answer the question. But we media train all these people, bosses and so on. Yeah. They see that ground to a halt in the Troubles. If I've got 1 minute, I would take you to task slightly when you mentioned earlier, quite rightly, about the local television and how important programs like Granada Reports and Northwest Tonight are. They are the biggest audiences of the evening in the areas. That's how important they are. And you mentioned the interviews with the Prime Minister. I mean, every year the Prime Minister sits down and lets each region come in and do 5 minutes with him and goes out. It's just been a tradition down the years. And that was what they did the other day. But there is, and you had a bit of a go at Boris. Now, I'm not a big fan of Boris at all. I couldn't work out who to vote for, Boris or Corbyn. In the last election, I was at my wit's end, but I insist on voting. I'm not going to say how I voted, but I didn't want either of them. However, I think it's easy to do gotcha interviews now, where you say to the Prime Minister, for instance, sitting there, now about the Northeast, you've just put new rules. Now tell us what this is and that is, and how that differs from Oldham, where you've got this in and that in. And I think that's easy gotcha stuff. You can say and each one. I don't actually think you should have to remember all that. They've made them and done them. The simple answer to people who say it's so confusing because television's saying it's confusing, because everybody's saying it's confusing. It's not confusing if you look at only your own region. Here in the Northwest, I'm in Manchester. The boroughs of there are 10 boroughs of Manchester. I'm in that area. You guys are wherever. People there are in Merseyside. Look at your own area and look it up. And the rules are quite simple for your own area. It's complicated when you see your rules against that rule, against the Northeast rules, which are all for different reasons. And it's not easy. We've got to beat this virus. We don't know how to beat it. Nobody knows how it works. But people have to do their best. And I think any government should be given a bit of leeway as they fight their way through it. Yes, they've done things wrong. But I think one should just be a bit more accepting at the minute that we have to do whatever we can. And at the end of the day, down to each and every person to do what this washing and so on. If we did that, we wouldn't be in the mess, but people stopped doing it.
I think that's a very fair comment, and I think you're right. And I think, you know, and I did think that myself, but perhaps was, I don't know, maybe he's trying to score cheap points. I think there is a tendency to blame Boris for everything COVID related, maybe, but anyway. Gordon, our time is up. We're going to go offline in a minute, and I just want to thank you so much. It's been really lovely talking to you, and it's
been a pleasure. Some
real fascinating stories, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And thank you for your honesty about your faith position. That's what I wanted to hear. And I'm certainly not holding it against you, and I will pray for you if that's all right. I know you might feel that futile, but I will. And it's been a real joy, and thank you so much. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. I said going to Costa was the highlight of my day these days because of all the lockdown measures. Doing this interview has been the biggest highlight of the last month. So
wow.
Thanks for asking me.
I'm honoured. I'm honoured. Okay, well, we'll say goodbye and we'll end it there, Gordon. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Take care. Bye, everybody. Bye.